Welcome to another day in the Matrix. This is Red Pill Podcast 255, and here we are, just days away from the annular solar eclipse on the Chinese Lunar New Year, kicking off the eclipse season with a week that I've been talking about in almost every Red Pill for the past 3 months. So, as you can imagine, we have a lot to cover here in today's Red Pill, and I want to get straight into it. But before we get started, as always, make sure to get relaxed, get comfortable, grab yourself a fresh cup of coffee or tea if it's a little earlier in the day, or maybe a beer or a glass of wine, or any beverage of your choice if it's getting a little later out there in the Matrix. And also, if you're interested in a specific altcoin and you'd like me to review the chart of that altcoin, then go ahead in the comments section below this post here on Patreon. Please submit a vote on whatever altcoin you'd like me to look at in next week's Red Pill podcast. Also, some of you might be wondering how I'm getting out this Red Pill a little bit earlier than usual. And this week is a little special because I was just warned 24 hours ago that I would be losing my power tomorrow. So I had to rush to get this one prepared and ready, but actually it worked out perfectly because I had a window of time to make sure that I can make this the best Red Pill possible for this very special week ahead. So it won't be like this next week. Typical time it'll get released next Sunday, but for now, enjoy this earlier Red Pill this week. But anyways, getting to it, this Monday, kicking off the week ahead with February 16th being the 47th day of this year. It's a day that we've been talking about for a while now, since it is in fact the last day of the year of the snake. And all throughout this year of the snake, the key code that we've been utilizing for pretty much all of our decodes is the number 47, or the mirror number 74. But especially since Donald Trump has become the 47th president of the United States, and he's been the talk of the town, arguably the most significant crypto influencer in the space. And I don't say that as a joke, it is truth. He's effectively playing a similar role to what Elon was playing in the last cycle. Perhaps a lot of you remember that, the influence he had on Dogecoin and Shiba Inu and pretty much the entire altcoin market. We had back in May of 2021, pretty much the entire altcoin market topped on the exact night that Elon went on Saturday Night Live, shilling Dogecoin and Shiba Inu. Then fast forward to January 2025, and we have Trump launching a meme coin alongside the launch of Melania's meme coin pretty much right before his inauguration. And that exact day of the inauguration marked peak euphoria for the altcoin market as a whole. And then after that, the entire market crashed into the date of April 7th, the 4-7 date. It's right there. So later in the year, we had silver, the 47th element. It broke out into price discovery. And the last time it did that type of move was back in 1979. That makes this exactly 47 years later here in early 2026. And now we're about to land on the 47th day of the year tomorrow. So the final day of the year of the snake, which, by the way, it ties perfectly to this upcoming total lunar eclipse, which is plugged in right over here on March 3rd. And I say they are tied together perfectly because they are 15 days apart. Now, the reason this number 15 is significant is because the number 47 right here is the 15th prime number. Perhaps some of you remember back on April 7th last year, where we had that major market correction and bottom, that was the start of the 15th week of the year. Probably going to be the same case this year as well. We have right over here, during the 15th week, April 7th lands. It'll be a Tuesday this time around. Last year, it was the start of the the 15th week of the year. So we have these prime numbers. They're very powerful. It's very important to consider these connections when decoding. The prime numbers definitely strengthen our decodes. We've proved that here time and time again. So we have the 47th day of the year, the final day of the year of the snake, and then we'll officially be in the year of the horse on the following day, February 17th, which I will be releasing a full-length presentation on very soon. I'm aiming for Chinese New Year on February 17th for its release. If I could somehow stay awake for like 2 days straight, I think I could pull it off. I'm not sure how I'm physically able to do this, but all jokes aside, I mean, a lot of you are already aware of all of what I have going on. I'm launching a new platform, and that's been taking time because we are perfectionists and we're trying to ensure that it's the best experience possible. Also, shout out to our alumni out there, anyone from what we called Waters Above University back in 2025. Some of you have renewed and joined our new platform as kind of like early access, if you know what I mean. And it's just so awesome to see real people using our platform already. But I've been working really hard on that behind the scenes, and then throwing in this year of the horse decoded makes it like absolute chaos for my schedule. So I can say though, I have a lot of this new decode mapped out. I pretty much have all the structure mapped out, and I have a lot of the visuals that I've been wanting to show you mapped out. And anyone who watched my year of the snake decode, or the year of the dragon decode, or the year of the rabbit decode, any of these Chinese New Year series decodes that I've been doing over the years, you all know that I pour my heart and soul into these, and I make them pretty much my best decode of the year, if you will. I think that's of course subject to people's opinions, but I have been known for this decode to kind of be the most sought after one. So hopefully I can not sleep for the next couple of days, and I'll make sure it happens for you guys. But bear with me if it's maybe a day late or so. I'm sure you'll all understand my thing here. Just being vulnerable with you all. But anyways, let's get back to this, all right? In the meantime, we have a couple of significant things to mention for the week ahead, which is, of course, I will argue, one of the most important weeks of this year, being that it's the start of Eclipse season. And we've already gone through all of the proof of why that's the case in pretty much the last 10 Red Pill podcasts. So I will spare you so we can focus on a new decode that'll tie everything together that we've been discussing here lately. And there'll be two parts to this. One of the parts will be what we're about to get into with some of the numerology and astrology stuff, but then we also have a whole section that'll be dedicated to Mercury retrograde. So this is going to be a really awesome podcast here today, because I've been having a lot of people reach out to me asking about the upcoming Mercury retrograde, which aligns with this eclipse season. So don't worry. As always, before we have Mercury retrograde, I always ensure that I go through a full thorough analysis with all of you guys, so that you're fully prepared for what's ahead. But let's start here with Chinese New Year, the 17th of February, just a couple days ahead. Of course, as you're aware, this will be the annular solar eclipse. It's landing on Chinese New Year. And what's really important about this is this unique decode we're about to get into tied to this code right here. 317 days left in the year on this exact day. And the reason why 317 is so important right now is because it's the 66th prime number. Remember what I told you about primes a moment ago. They're very important. Now, some of you might be asking, why does 66 matter? Well, let me get into the power behind this 66 code, because Bitcoin was recently trading at 126K, and then it dropped to 60K, even a little bit shy of 60K. And you're going to see right there that means Bitcoin has corrected $66,000, dropping from 126 to 60K. And even if you were to look at specific leverage exchanges that show Bitcoin went to 59K or whatever, the full drop is still within $66,000 from the all-time high. And the date that all-time high happened was the 6th day of October, and the day the drop down happened was the 6th day in February. That's a lot of sixes, and we're not done yet. This upcoming Wednesday, the day after, which would be the 18th of February, we could call this like the first official day with pure horse year energy. That is a 66 double-digit date numerology. As we just said, Bitcoin has dropped 66,000 from the local high. Keep in mind, February 6th, the date of the recent low for Bitcoin, and quickly type that in, was an 18 date numerology. And 18 is 6 plus 6 plus 6. There's your sixes. And I'll dive much deeper into that code in the upcoming Year of the Horse Decoded, because 18 is important in that decode. But for now, just to share my thoughts on the year ahead, I've been making a lot of number 6 connections lately, and today's Red Pill podcast clearly shows additional connections to strengthen this even more. But coming back to this 66 connection, with the first official day of the Year of the Horse being the 66 double-digit numerology, and we had Bitcoin crashing 66,000 from the all-time high, we can't leave out the fact that Bitcoin's lowest price that it's hit so far was on February 6th. That's the exoteric Gregorian date of 26. So we have the 26 code, and when you speak out this number, you have 2 6s. 66 shows up again. But also, we're in the year ending with 26. This is how most people would shorten this year when either they're talking or when they're writing. If they wanted to write out the year in short form, we would just write 26. And also, this is a theme most of you are aware of with my decoding system. We have the Hebrew year that we're in, which is 5,786, and that adds up. 5 plus 7 plus 8 plus 6 becomes 26. And now we have Bitcoin crashing into the 2-6 date and bottoming there, which is very important. Well, if you thought that was interesting, let me show you how February 6th is tied to our upcoming total lunar eclipse on March 3rd. That is right. They are 26 days apart. And March 3rd happens to be the 62nd day of this year. 62 naturally being the mirror number of 26. And then we have the week that is starting the 26th day of this year. Let me show you this on the charts. This is probably a better chart to look at. So we're looking over here to January 26th, right there, which was the 26th day of this year. And that was the week that was pretty much the turning point of everything, where we had Bitcoin start crashing lower after that pivot right there. The week we broke the April 7th lows. So remember, we had these April 7th lows from last year? Well, that was the week starting on the 26th day of this year that we started to get weak. Funny enough, play on words. This was the World War tariff crash. And April 26th day of the year, Bitcoin crashes and starts breaking that structure into the 2-6 date on February 6th in the year 26. So this 26 code is massive. You guys need to pay attention to this for this year. As crypto investors, we need to pay attention to this code, especially because of what we just watched go down with Bitcoin tied to this code. The first day of this Chinese Lunar New Year being the 317 days left in the year. That is your 66th prime number. 2 6s tied back to 26. This is how you see the code within the code. This is where you go deeper. And the current all-time high for Bitcoin, interestingly enough, is 126,000. So it's 26,000 above the 100K milestone. So This really is all tied together now. So let's continue to keep this 26 code in mind moving forward, and I'll of course dive much deeper into that in this Year of the Horse decoded presentation. And speaking of the number 26, we have Mercury retrograde coming up, and it will be starting on February 26th, the 26th day of this month. It's absolutely wild. So with us approaching this date a little over a week from now, this makes this the perfect Red Pill podcast to prepare for this upcoming Mercury retrograde with our Mercury retrograde analysis. So that's what we're going to do right now, starting with a recap of the last time Mercury stationed retrograde back in November of last year, which interestingly enough, if you mark from the highest price that Bitcoin traded at during that Mercury retrograde and you bring it down to the full corrective target as low as we went during that Mercury retrograde, you'll see that Bitcoin corrected $26,000. So it's like, geez, man. Okay, so interestingly enough, that's how that went down. And we're literally instantly back at this 26 code immediately again. Absolutely crazy. But as you can see, the last time Mercury was stationed retrograde, it was brutal for Bitcoin and the crypto market. Now, since our upcoming Mercury retrograde will be during eclipse season, that's very important. So we have the total lunar eclipse on March 3rd, and we have Mercury retrograde lasting from the 26th day of February until March 20th. This actually puts this upcoming Mercury retrograde perfectly in our time frame that we've been talking about regarding Bitcoin's bottoming structure here in this chart, where we talked about the bottoming structure tends to form, that's its tendency, is 5 to 6 weeks before the lunar eclipse up to 2 to 3 weeks after the lunar eclipse. So we have this lunar eclipse, we go backwards, we're about a little over 3 weeks, call it 4 weeks, pretty damn close. And then we have the 2 to 3 weeks after, getting you to around March 24th. This is perfect because it aligns perfectly with everything we're about to cover today. So this chart that we've been looking at covers that. We've been focused on this particular chart, and I'll zoom out and show you what I mean. We've been focused on this particular chart now for pretty much 3 months and every single red pill. It's because we've been leading up to this particular eclipse season, and this particular eclipse season happens to be the final lunar, at least I'll be very clear, because there's some people that are really precise on their words. So let me be very precise in what I'm about to say. This will be the final full total lunar eclipse until New Year's Day 2029. So yes, we have a lunar eclipse later this year in August. We have many lunar eclipses between now and 2029. But the one that's coming up in a couple weeks is the only full total lunar eclipse. No argument. It is what it is. So the theme here for Bitcoin is that the most important lunar eclipse is the final lunar eclipse in the lunar cycle, which would be this one over here and mark the bottom, the FTX crash. It'd be this one over here and mark the bottom, whatever was the narrative, who cares? Over here it marked your bottom, and even in this cycle before it marked your bottom back in fucking 2011, okay? This is a long time ago. Sorry for cursing. But since I've been releasing these red pills lately, a lot of people are coming out of the woodwork saying like blood moons for the first time in their analysis, and it's wild. Because I know where they're getting this stuff from, but it's like they're just getting it when? This past 2 weeks? I haven't even made any YouTube videos. So I'm glad the knowledge and wisdom is getting out there, but I worry because some people don't understand all the context that comes along for the ride. And that's what you guys are getting access to with all of these things that we're bringing together. Whether it be these events such as full moons, quarter moons, and even up to the Mercury retrograde analysis. And there's other things that we have covered, of course, in the past as well, such as Venus retrogrades, etc. But we're trying to not get too complicated here. And the purpose of what we're doing with this is to simplify so that you know you can go over here to this chart on this website, timeanddate.com. It's not a hidden website, and you can find out all this information for yourself. Just go year by year, and you'll see what I mean. So we have a partial lunar eclipse coming up in August, not a total lunar eclipse. Will this eclipse matter? Not as much as this eclipse. This matters more. Why? Because it's a total solar eclipse in isolation of any other full lunar eclipse, and it happens before the lunar eclipse. We went over this in the probably like 3 red pills ago. The order of which they occur matters. We have solar eclipse out in the inside, lunar eclipse on the outside. All this matters. So when I'm seeing analysts like, and their first time ever bringing in the eclipses and they're talking about blood moons, it's a little scary because not a lot of people understand all of what's happening here. And then they see that stuff and they just call it like a meme. And it's sad because this is like really powerful knowledge to have. You know, this is like in some ways sacred knowledge. And I don't say that to make myself sound important. I really mean that. This is information that like, it took some time to figure out, you know, and I get it now. Things are becoming very mainstream, but in a way, I hope that people respect this stuff and really, really respect it for what it is. Because if it's missing all that context, then what's going to happen is if we were to pump from here, people are just going to completely disregard all of the other information that makes sense as to why we're pumping from here. I hope I'm getting to the point, but I'll get back on the rails because I think our community, out of any community, already knows a lot of this stuff. They understand. So let's keep it moving. Now, this upcoming Mercury retrograde that we have from February 26th over to March 20th, this nuance that we just covered regarding the eclipses, it's very crucial with this upcoming Mercury retrograde. Now, before we determine how this upcoming Mercury retrograde is likely to play out, first we need to review how Bitcoin traded during Mercury retrograde in the past to identify a theme that tends to play out during those timeframes when Mercury is stationed retrograde. And the easiest way to do this is by labeling each of the phases of Mercury retrograde. So you have this little chart over here. When we label each of these phases, you'll understand a little easier how we can go from where we're at now, which is right before Mercury retrograde, all the way up to 2 weeks after. So this gives you a really solid amount of time to understand far in advance. Okay, starting with phase 1, which will be about a week before Mercury stations retrograde. That's about 4 to 7 days before, to be a little bit more specific, is where the pattern starts. This would officially start on February 19th. That's this upcoming Thursday. So keep that in mind because this is really close, and that's when phase 1 kicks off. Then we have phase 2. That's the first week of Mercury retrograde. So Mercury stations retrograde on the 26th, and then we're talking about the first 4 to 7 days after that date, which is phase 2. Specifically, those first 4 to 7 days are significant, and that spans through the date of March 5th. This literally makes the 4 to 7 day time frame right around the total lunar eclipse on March 3rd. So this is very important. Then we have phase 3. That's essentially like the middle phase, making up a bulk of the time Mercury is actually stationed retrograde for the remaining 2 to 3 weeks. And we're calling the end of phase 3 when Mercury starts to station direct again. Then lastly, we have phase 4, which is the shadow phase, and some people call that retroshade, this being the 2 weeks after Mercury stations direct again. Note, many astrologers, like professional astrologers, they also consider the 2 weeks before Mercury stations retrograde the shadow phase as well. It's normal to hear about this 2 weeks before, 2 weeks after being called retroshade also. Just thought that would be worth mentioning since I'm about to get into our unique Mercury retrograde analysis here, utilizing my 4-phase system to simplify everything for everyone in our community here. So we're not looking at this through the lenses of an astrologer. If you're an astrologer, Understand that we're not going to go that deep into that particular stuff. We just want to focus on the patterns here, and I've done my best to simplify it into these 4 phases. So now that you know about these 4 simplified phases, let's review some of the past iterations to dial in our expectations for the week to come. And the first thing I can share to save you a lot of confusion is the main pattern that we've seen about 2/3 of the time, up to 75% of the time, is that phase 1, this whole week before thing, is when we tend to see a momentary top followed by a short-term correction into Mercury retrograde. In plain English, about 4 to 7 days before Mercury stations retrograde, we're up. And then into the 48 hours surrounding Mercury retrograde, so that's the 48 hours before to the 48 hours after, we have a little bit of a correction. And then into phase 2, which is the first 4 to 7 days, we tend to pump up. And then we have somewhat of like a mini bull trap. Since going into phase 3, it's been known to erase all of those gains that happened in those first 4 to 7 days. And essentially we see Bitcoin completing phase 3 at almost the exact same price as it was trading at during the first day of Mercury retrograde. So to simplify this even more, Mercury retrograde is when Bitcoin trades sideways around 70% of the time. And it looks something like this, if I could draw it out for you. So we have the day Mercury stations direct. Imagine Bitcoin opened here. We have the first 4 or 5 days, and then we could see something like this. Ending where we started, aka sideways, and moving into it, we could do something like this, 4 to 7 days before, and then correct into it, 2 days before, 2 days after, a little bit of a corrective phase, and then we move up again. Don't worry about the prices that I'm drawing out here. I'm just showing you the energy of the way these waves can go. Now, in phase 3, we could also have something like this. So we pump 4 to 7 days before, we correct in, we go up 47 days after, and then we can do this. This is something we've also seen before. Again, ending where we started. Still sideways, but instead of having a dip in between, we rose. Doesn't matter. It's still sideways. So this is something to consider. The in-between on phase 3, it could be either direction, but it's usually that 70% of the time we close back off wherever we started. And that's really the key, because it gives you a longer term horizon to analyze. Today, we're actually going to focus a lot on this phase, on phase 4, because anyone who's newer to my Mercury retrograde analysis here, this is going to be a lot of information to soak in. So that's why I'm doing so much to simplify everything for you by showing you the patterns. But what really matters a lot is that if Bitcoin closes the first daily close of Mercury retrograde, you can save that price. You could write it down, or if you're on TradingView over here, you could take a horizontal ray and you can mark it like that. Then almost 70% of the time you could expect Bitcoin will close off Mercury retrograde at almost the same exact price. And this translates to sideways, choppy price action without resolution. The resolution concept is regarding trend. So what is the trend? Well, if we are in a sideways trend, expect more sideways. If we are in a downtrend, we could expect that to be the phase where we slow down for a second before going lower. And it's the same thing when we're pumping up. We could be pumping up into Mercury retrograde and then stall out, go sideways, and then get resolution after it. That's what I mean by that term, resolution. So this whole thing that I've explained to you right here, it's actually quite similar to how human behavior is during Mercury retrograde. As many of you are aware, if you know about Mercury retrograde and the way people complain about it, it's where people tend to overthink, feel confused. They might struggle with making decisions, or they tend to get into conflicts often, even with people that they love or consider close to them. Just like lots of overall confusion, and ultimately it's a time frame to go out of your way to practice the discipline required to stay focused and on track with your vision. So it's not an excuse. The same thing with full moons, the same thing with eclipses. Like, some people get into all this astrology stuff and they start like blaming it, like making up excuses. And that's not greatness. That's mediocrity. And I'm sorry if that bothers people, but you need to realize that you're the compilation of everything, of the all, not just these planets and what fucking direction they're headed in. Like, you're made in the image of God. Like, remember that, all right? And never blame these things. That would be the antithesis of what knowledge is, because knowledge is supposed to set you free. It's not supposed to hold you back. And before you knew about this Mercury retrograde stuff, you probably didn't have anything to blame. And that's what becomes a tendency for some people. And I don't want that here. Like, be a wolf, all right? No blame game. So we're approaching eclipse season. We're approaching Mercury retrograde season. If anything, you welcome the energy that it will bring to you so it could teach you to make you a better version of yourself. Nothing more, nothing less. Now, since I've given you the spark notes of what happens around the 70% of the time regarding Mercury retrograde, then of course you're probably asking, well, what happens the other 30% of the time? Because that is 3 out of 10 times we could have something else occur. And that is where some of the biggest moves we see during the year happen. It's actually tied to Mercury retrograde. So this is why we're even covering this in the first place. There's a theme where 70% of the time we do chop sideways, which is pretty interesting to say the least. And it's also the time where we see some of the biggest moves in either direction. So this helps us a lot when it comes to understanding the volatility of the asset long term. And then remember, we have like 3 to 4 Mercury retrogrades per year. So this can help you map out the year ahead, of course. Now let's dive into some of those key iterations in the charts where we see those extremes, where we see those quote unquote big moves, so that we could prepare ourselves for the potential extremes ahead. And one of those extremes would be our last iteration of Mercury retrograde, where we had from November down to November, let's say November 11th to November 21st, where we had that $26,000 drop, that 26 code really taunting us. But now that we got that out of the way, let's actually move on to the prior iteration, which was July last year. And this is actually a perfect example of what tends to happen that 70% of the time. I actually want to show you this really quickly so that you could just see where I'm coming from. So it's not just me explaining how it could go. And this is a real world example. We have 4 days before. Let me bring this along for the ride 1 second. So that way you could see this play by play. Okay. So we have here phase 1, 4 to 7 days before. We tend to top before. There you go. 4 days on the nose before Mercury retrograde. We stall out, right? Funny enough, this was an all-time high. And then that followed by a correction into the 48 hours into Mercury retrograde. And then we have phase 2, which is 4 to 7 days into Mercury retrograde. And here we go. Day 4 on the other side, we have that being a local top. It's kind of like a fake out move to the upside. And that right there just perfectly describes how I went through the phases with you earlier. And then you can see we actually did have a correction down in the middle, like almost exactly as I drew it for you. But look at where we ended Mercury retrograde. Just look to the left and look at where we ended. So it didn't matter the correction we had in between. Of course, unless you're trading and you're holding massive leverage positions during this time and you get liquidated. But other than that, I mean, this is just a swing trade opportunity for people, or it's just a hold. But if you got in earlier leading into this, it's an opportunity also to de-risk So there's many ways for you to trade this setup if you wanted to as well, even though I don't recommend you getting into leverage trading unless you're passionate about it. I'm just giving you an example of how this can be played. And then you have like a bunch of options here with this awareness, because this is the core pattern, what we usually see. So we closed off phase 3 of Mercury retrograde exactly as we started off. And then we have this moving into the Mercury retro shade, this shadow phase. That is very important because you can see the way that we corrected after Mercury station direct again. So I actually want us to focus on this. This is the final phase where we see some notable volatility, especially with regards to corrections. And that's actually what I want us to focus on here for the rest of today's red pill, since that's one of the key nuances of what makes tracking these Mercury retrogrades significant in the first place, because there's clear, undeniable patterns here, and now we're going to review some of those. And of course, we want to really focus on any Mercury retrograde iterations that are not sideways. I feel like that's key. But even for the ones that are overall sideways, we also want to pay attention to whenever we see big moves in the shadow phase, because that will give us a thorough understanding of how these larger time frames are affected. And you'll see that in July, August of last year, right here in this particular iteration that we just covered. And then the same thing we see happening over here in December of 2024, where we see in the shadow phase a notable correction. I mean, it almost looks the same here and here. Look, we topped into the beginning of the shadow phase, corrected into the end of it. Same. It was also the same over here in, August, September of 2024. We have a notable correction during the shadow phase, and then that actually happened again in the prior iteration, a correction in the shadow phase. So we have a theme here. Notable pump into the earlier part of Mercury retrograde, and then we have a correction out into the middle, or even sometimes all the way to the end of Mercury retrograde. But it's a buy the dip opportunity, and that's something that's at least the pattern when we're in an uptrend, which so far a lot of people are calling this like a full break of trend. But you have to remember that this move happened in the beginning of February. I do think there's a lot of manipulation to be spoken about here with regards to how the end of the month played out. But if we were to look at where we closed off the month and the fact that we still have a half a month to go, this can all be absorbed by the end of the month. And then it's kind of like a speaking a little too soon thing. But I get it. Right now, there's a lot to consider. I'm not saying that Bitcoin can't go lower. Actually, there's definitely a conversation that we'll be having a little bit later regarding that. But for now, just focusing on the facts that it's a little too early to call those sorts of things in the macro. And let's keep going. Let me show you some more extreme iterations. I actually want to skip to over here where you can see this shadow phase was rough. We have the total lunar eclipse in May of 2022, which, by the way, that was the total lunar eclipse where Terra Luna collapsed. And as you can see, we had the total lunar eclipse at the very beginning of Mercury retrograde, which aligns with the type of upcoming lunar eclipse that we have. Total lunar eclipse pretty much at the same position with Mercury retrograde. So keep that in mind. Then during the shadow phase, even though we were sideways for Mercury retrograde itself, during the shadow phase, things got nasty. And interestingly enough, when I zoom out and you see where that ended, so that's the all-time high, that's the end of the shadow phase. This was where a bulk of Bitcoin's bear market and the whole crash took place. This is 74% out of what ended up being a 77% full correction. So with that being said, that actually aligns with what I've been teaching recently, how we could have the quote unquote bottom for Bitcoin pretty much happening now. I mean, what difference would it make if it was now at, for example, 60K was our lowest price, And then let's just say at the beginning of April, Bitcoin went to 57K or 55K. Are we really gonna lose our shit over 3K move on Bitcoin? Like, come on. So I think the energy right now over calling the bottoms in mainstream like crypto influencer land is probably way more extreme to the downside than it might actually turn out to be. And that was how this went back in 2022 as well, where we had a major narrative hit us with the FTX crash and the actual event itself of the collapse of FTT, and the prison sentence of Sam Bankman-Fried, et cetera, and all of the chaos this created. But it marked the bottom. Bitcoin didn't go any lower after that shit. I mean, it was like 2 weeks or so that we chopped around the lows. Might have taken 2 months before we headed into recovery. But as for the price Bitcoin traded at, it didn't go much lower from this crash over here to this move over here. What's a 10% move for Bitcoin? And by the way, just so you know, here, XRP hit its bottom. It didn't go lower. Ethereum hit its bottom. Dogecoin hit its bottom on this move. So losing your mind over this next move, even if it took a month or it took 3 months or 4 months for trying to catch the perfect bottom, when some of the top altcoins are already bottoming at the first part of the corrective phase, it's just getting a little dramatic for no reason. And that's what the market maker wants. They want us to think Bitcoin's going to zero because Epstein made it, and their XRP is going to zero because whatever Dave Schwartz is. Who cares? Who cares? They're gonna need narratives right now more than ever because they want you to sell the fucking bottom. And that's kind of the energy. And people are gonna say, well, XRP can go to 90 cents or XRP can go to 80 cents. Yeah, but how long will it trade there for? And then who cares? If a month later it's back at $1.50 and then you're at the same fucking price we are right now. I think this is actually quite a mature way to look at the market, and people are like losing it because it's like they forgot what this was all like. And a lot of people think that Bitcoin needs to have a 70% correction like it did the last cycle, as if they just erased all of what Bitcoin has done since that bear market. I mean, this is like one of the most, when you really just turn off everything, this is the best possible structure you can have. A double top, major correction, stair-step recovery. What was this, 9 months of trading sideways, retesting the prior double top, launch above it, fill back test both of the double tops, plus this entire horizontal structure. I can keep going. And this doesn't even matter if you hold Bitcoin or not. This is what the market lives off of. It's the market's, what would be the best way to put it? It's the power plant of the market. So whether you like it or not, it's the same thing with precious metals. Whether you invest in gold and silver or not, your opinion is irrelevant. It's an energy component of the way the rest of the market moves, because it's a massive piece to the puzzle of liquidity. That's what Bitcoin is for cryptocurrency. So with that being said, I think this Mercury retrograde analysis is really fascinating when you look at this like absolutely devastating crash that we had in the shadow phase tied to this lunar eclipse, and how regardless if Bitcoin were to have a deeper correction, it's just sort of aligning with what we've already experienced in the grand scheme of things, in any pattern that you want to compare this to. And one other last thing to say before we continue is too many people are thinking that Bitcoin needs to do the exact same bear market that it did in the last cycle. And although there are some similarities as we speak, I would be shocked if they repeated the same exact bear market, because they did not repeat the same exact bull run. The structure that we have right now is not the same regarding this quote unquote double top we have. It's not even close to be the same. And also, the way Bitcoin rallied all throughout it leading to this moment isn't the same either. So I don't find this structure over here to be similar personally. What was the move that Bitcoin made, the extra of 6%? or something. It outperformed on that move. It outperformed on hitting new all-time highs before the halving. It didn't have a C19 like crash in the midst of all of this, while altcoins did have crazy crashes in Bitcoin's move up. Institutional involvement was not even important in all of this, because look at what we did after the ETF launched. Bitcoin barely went up 50%, and then it traded sideways for a full year almost. Who cares about the institutions? It's fucking irrelevant. So they're just giving us stuff all the time when we need to be bearish because they need us to be bearish. They want us to be bullish because they need us to be bullish. And we kind of need to find the middle ground right now, especially when we're approaching eclipse season. So anyways, I hope you guys appreciated that like little side stream of consciousness. Getting back to this shadow phase that we had over here in Mercury retrograde in the last cycle, and how this was definitely a major correction, but it aligns with everything that we've been talking about regarding the timing, since the end of Mercury retrograde shadow phase for us will be the end of March into very early April. So with that, let's continue, because we have the next example, which is probably the most popular example that we can review, which is right here. This was absolute destruction during Mercury retrograde shadow phase, and that would be the C19 crash in 2020. Funny enough, Bitcoin topped out 4 days before. Yeah, this keeps up with my pattern, by the way, because Bitcoin topped 4 days before Mercury retrograde. And then around 6 days into Mercury retrograde, we stalled out, and then we came down, and then actually we made it pretty much to the end of Mercury retrograde before this thing absolutely took a tumble, right? So when we moved into the shadow phase, it was like a guillotine was dropped, and then Bitcoin corrected 50% in 3 days. And that shadow phase also included, listen closely, the bottom, because Bitcoin never traded lower than that ever again in the rest of its history. The same thing over here in this bottom when we hit extremes. So that's actually pretty fascinating, because the same thing happened last year regarding the Mercury retrograde setup, where we bottomed and we had the lowest price during the shadow phase, and that was the lowest price we traded at for the rest of the year until recently in this new calendar year of 2026. So we have Mercury stationing direct on literally April 7th into April 8th. And the lowest daily close that Bitcoin had was April 8th. It marked our lows before Bitcoin recovered and headed up higher. Just keep that in mind. We also have back in 2018, something similar right here around the bottom. Literally, the bottom of the bear market in 2018 was during a Mercury retrograde shadow phase. Absolutely wild. So this brings us back to this chart that we were focusing on last week, which is this right here, where we have the bottom of the 2018 market, we have the C19 crash, we have the FTX crash, and then we have what recently happened, and how all of them are in alignment with an insanely oversold RSI, whether that be the 2-day, 3-day RSI, or even now approaching the weekly RSI. Weekly RSI aligns with all past bear market bottoms. That's what's currently the situation for Bitcoin as of last week's close. We have also an 888 fib backtest. I went over all this with you last week. So this is unbelievable how this is all tied together. Regarding that bottom, Mercury retrograde shadow phase. Crazy. All right, so you'll see all of these extremes, they align with the final lunar eclipse of the lunar cycle. Here, and also what we're approaching. You could also see that bringing in this Mercury retrograde analysis really solidifies the importance of the month ahead, with the next Mercury retrograde shadow phase happening from March 20th until April 3rd. And now this really makes me think about how the 2018 setup over here that we reviewed in the last Red Pill podcast, it makes me think about it quite a bit, because I showed you that quote coincidence regarding February 6th, which is this major correction that came in right here. Let me show you real fast. Where are we at? So the coincidence of February 6th, it's right here. Remember, we just crashed into February 6th. So that was the day that Bitcoin crashed into, and then we had a notable bounce from that exact day into, which so far, that's exactly how it's playing as we speak. Let me just show you the current Bitcoin chart. You can see we bottomed here, we've bounced up, we've bottomed here, we're bouncing up. Today is the 15th. We're looking really damn similar in the current chart. And how back then, the date that Bitcoin crashed was the same. And then after the bounce, we have pretty much all the same dates as key pivot points in 2018, setting up and aligning perfectly with what are our eclipses this year. So let me just show you. We have February 17th right there. That's the upcoming annular solar eclipse date. That was the date we stalled out. Then we have a small correction into the end of the month. And then we have Bitcoin popping back up into around March 3rd right there. We also stalled out at that same exact point. And March 3rd this year is our total lunar eclipse. And then into the beginning of April, literally April 1st, we had a major correction. And that also aligns with what will be the final days of the Mercury retrograde phase. So this is all lining up. And if you look at where Bitcoin corrected to in early April of 2018, it was right back where we were trading at on the February 6th crash. So that's worth keeping in mind too, because that means that if Bitcoin were to rise up right now and then correct back into early April, we might not need to go lower again. Of course, this was the start of this bear market unfolding, but my argument is that this euphoria that you're seeing in Q4 of 2017, that was the euphoria we had in crypto back in Q4 of 2024, not 2025. The way Bitcoin topped in Q4 2025 was not euphoric. If anything, it was boring. All right. So this is not the same move that we ended our recent bull run with. And the biggest move we saw for Bitcoin in our recent cycle also aligns with the last time we saw euphoria in the altcoins, which was this move right here from around, let's call it 58K all the way up to about 108K. This also included the milestone of Bitcoin hitting 100K for the first time. So of course we were euphoric. Remember back here, we saw XRP go from like 30 cents to almost $3. Just a straight line breakout. We saw that with a lot of stuff. That was the last time we saw euphoria, and I'm arguing it was here. So in the typical kind of concept that Bitcoin takes a year to bottom, from top to bottom, I don't think that's going to, I don't think that's going to be the case moving forward anymore. But if it was, then that means the euphoria is marked over here in around, sorry. That means the euphoria is marked over here. And now we're talking 420 days since the local bottom, and that actually aligns with what we saw back in this cycle, 2013, where it took longer than a year for Bitcoin to bottom. Sure, we did this double bottom, but it was all a bottoming structure. And anything you bought during this time was clearly very smart because Bitcoin traded around $230. Look at what it went on to doing in the next cycle. Mind-blowing. I'm not saying we're going to go up 9,000% in the next cycle, but what I'm trying to tell you is it's been a while since we've had euphoria here in crypto. No one can deny that. And time is everything in markets, not just price. Price is what impacts you immediately. Time is what could start to really grind away at you. And that's what hurts people the most, is lacking patience or lacking a sophisticated investment thesis that is forecasted long enough to be a profitable investor. It's as simply put as that. So lastly, we have the year of the horse, which this chart is pretty messed up, but this was the last year of the horse in 2014. And you'll also see that Bitcoin had its low for the year, the first yearly low at least, also in the month of April. We had last year, the low was in the month of April, April 7th. And here's something that's really interesting to wrap this up. I do believe the full moon here in April, we bottomed 4 days before, right there. So we have the full moon and we have it right there 4 or so days. And that was also the case in our tariff crash, if I remember correctly. April full moon, about 4 days before we hit the lows. Then if you look at this year, where the full moon will be in April, it's April 2nd. So 4 days before we'll actually land in the exact time frame that I was just telling you about for this chart right here. These final weeks after the lunar eclipse. So literally everything lines up from the typical bottoming structure that happens for Bitcoin 2 to 3 weeks after the upcoming total lunar eclipse on March 3rd. Then this aligns with the Mercury retrograde time frame that we just talked about with the shadow phase, which you can see. This would be March 24th right here. And then we have this going till around April 2nd, April 3rd, depending on how you count it. And also something to mention is that we have the March new moon, which is right here as Mercury is stationing direct again. And that's been a theme for us lately, how we tend to dump after new moons and then we correct into full moons. So we could have a sharp correction after November 20th, for example, or March 19th, for example. I believe that's the new moon. Yep, exactly. So we have March 19th new moon. We could correct for like maybe 24 or 48 hours after, and then that would all align perfectly as well. Either or, we're really like splitting hairs here because it's like a couple of days difference to the left or right, you know? Essentially the end of March sounds like a really solid time frame for us to have. Let's just imagine the completion of a bottoming structure. And now this can go in several ways. This could be really choppy and really sideways, but we're close, man. We're really, really close. And if it was the bottom of the entire cycle, then imagine how great that would be in the grand scheme of things, how close we are. It'd be like looking at markets back in October of 2022, you know? We're sure we did take a little dip lower the following month, but when it was the scariest time to buy Bitcoin, it was the best time to buy Bitcoin. Same thing for all the altcoins. So, and then of course in November, things got really rough for certain projects, for things like Solana. I mean, it went much, much lower, but Solana was a really positive project that cycle. So it made a lot of gains. If you make a lot of gains, you have a lot more to give back. XRP did not have the best cycle in 2021. Therefore, it bottomed early in 2022 in June instead of November. So just keep all that stuff in mind. Some things had like a rip the band-aid off moment, like Dogecoin, for example, where it was one of the best performers in the last cycle, but it bottomed also super early in around June of 2022. I'm feeling that way personally about a lot of altcoins here in February, March, and maybe latest early April. Latest. So that's amazing news for how close we are. So lastly, to share my personal opinion on what I'm expecting, I personally feel a majority of the crypto investors are just so bearish right now that it wouldn't shock me to see a little bit of relief, but still overall I'd expect chop because we're in eclipse season, and it's an eclipse season paired with Mercury retrograde. That's where they hit us with the biggest rituals of the year. So that was the case last year where we had Mercury retrograde during eclipse season, and we also had a Venus retrograde. That's a really interesting combo. Obviously, Venus tied to Taurus, Taurus tied to finance. So there's a lot you could talk about with that, but we're not going to go too deep into that necessarily right now. Just saying that I think what we could have happen, if we were to have a crazy relief rally from here where everyone gets insanely bullish again, and then it turns out to be a bull trap and all the gains get erased into late March and early April, and that ends up being the true bottom, which is probably the base case, and this entire red pill has been focused on that exact setup. And if it were to turn out that way, it doesn't necessarily mean Bitcoin has to go lower than where it was on February 6th. So keep that in mind. February 6th could very well be the low. tied to that 26 and 66 code that I talked about with you earlier. Also, it can turn out to be where Bitcoin rises into like the mid 80K zone, and then we fall back to the 60K zone again and build support around there, where we recently crashed in February 6th. That would be almost identical to the setup that we had in 2018, for example. And then we have the second theory, which would be for the immediate short term, is that we still build our bottoming structure around this exact time frame. So that doesn't change. The static opinion that I have is bottoming structure. Now we're just getting into the nitty gritty of like how the specifics, you know? So the ultimate, like some people have been saying lately that I'm not like just picking something to settle on. And it's like, how many more times can I say bottoming structure? I only speak one language, by the way. Bottoming structure. I don't know how to say it in French. You guys want to help me out? It probably sounds like erotic in French. But literally, bottoming structure. I don't care how the hell it happens. That's what I am seeing right now for the month of March overall. So that's been my base case for a long, long time now. Why? Because, as I'll say for the 1,200th time, it is the final lunar eclipse of our lunar cycle. So I'm not moving the goalpost or changing how I feel or giving anybody any confusing mixed messages. It's just we're building on it more and more. And today we had the Mercury retrograde analysis to really solidify everything. So all in all, I'm still expecting March or early April latest as the quote last phase unquote of this local bottoming structure Bitcoin is developing as we speak. And of course, we have another eclipse season later in the year, but we'll get to that. We have to get through this one first. Everything that we've shared today is in alignment with the upcoming Mercury retrograde and Mercury retrograde phase. So we'll wrap up today's decode there, since I have a big presentation I'll be dropping soon for this year of the horse decoded. That one will dive deep into the entire year ahead, all of 2026, all the way up until Q1 in 2027. So now let's pivot over into more traditional technical analysis. We'll do some quick thoughts on Bitcoin, then go over to Ethereum and XRP. And then before we move into the altcoins that you all voted on this week, I'll actually take a moment to quickly check in with silver and gold, since those are both very important for us to keep an eye on regardless if you invest in metals or not, because of the influence the precious metals have over this entire asset class, especially for crypto. So let's get into this chart over here for Bitcoin. We do have a bi-weekly close coming in. Beautiful backtest on this major trend line. Trend line was last backtested over here at the bear market bottom in 2022, backtested on the C19 crash, backtested over here in the bottom of 2018, and then you could see it even played a role in this cycle back in 2014, where we had this parabola, we came back to it, snaked around it a bit, and then once we fell through it, we moved into the bottom. Then we gravitated back to it in our following solar cycle, backtested it here, and then had our final euphoria phase, right? Came right back to it in the most depressing phase. This is your black swan phase, most depressing phase, and then recently we've just really nosedived straight into this major trend line. I believe that's significant, especially because now we're at a full 50% correction for Bitcoin, and it's around that level that we see Bitcoin we see Bitcoin start to have what is considered to be a notable relief rally, typically. And when you're backtesting this key horizontal structure, you could really feel a lot more confident about that as well. Let's look at the weekly. In many ways, I'm glad that Bitcoin ripped the Band-Aid off and came down to these lower levels, because this is the biggest correction we've seen for Bitcoin since the last bear cycle. So where are we on the weekly RSI? Oh yeah, so on the weekly RSI, we're oversold. Very rare to get here. You could see the last time we were here and oversold, it was back in June 2022. So that's great news. And then the time before that was back in November 2018. So here and here. Sorry, here. That's crazy, man. That's crazy. So this is how oversold we got over here. And then this is what makes me feel like, yeah, of course, we could have Bitcoin close a couple of weekly candles back at the 60K zone, and it will drive the RSI down lower in the short term, which right now sits at 29. It's totally possible. This is just one indicator, right? But it's aligning with serious macro data points that can't be, you just can't look away, you know? So another thing people are talking about is the 200-week moving average. You know, this is going to be a common thing to bring up. The fact that the 200-week moving average is currently sitting at 60. Okay, that's the EMA. The SMA is what most people talk about when they're talking about the 200, and that's at 58,200. So we just had, let me just check and make sure my mic is good, okay? We just had Bitcoin come down to 59,800. I mean, we barely kissed the 200. So this is why after a couple weeks, you know, call it early April, there wouldn't be anything weird about Bitcoin coming back to this level one more time to backtest the 200. But in a lot of ways, it's like everyone wants the 200 to be backtested. That would fit so nicely with all of everyone's expectations. And that's again, like, does Bitcoin throw you a curveball right now? Crypto's done this before, or throws you curveballs. In the last cycle, when everyone was preaching that the 200 would be our bottom, Bitcoin said fuck off, and it went much lower than that. So keep that in mind too, man. A lot of people are like, I don't know what to say, but I'm seeing so many people that are like calling certain analysts absolute geniuses. Like, I think a great example would be Ben Cohen, and like he was telling people to sell back at like 28K Bitcoin. This is documented, by the way. It's all documented. So we need to step away and just be very cautious about overly relying on some of these things. Like Bitcoin closed below the 55, it went to the 100, it fell below the 100, now it's made it to the almost 200. It has to hit the 200, right? Well, that was the same shit that everyone was singing back here, and Bitcoin again went much, much lower than what people expected. So I'd be cautious. I actually would love for Bitcoin to go much, much lower, by the way, because if it went below 50, then I would do whatever it takes to get as much Bitcoin as possible. But I don't FOMO in this like weirdness that we have right here. And plus, I've been very vulnerable and open with everyone that I've invested most of my money into my new project. I've hired a full team of people. We're not using fucking AI to build it. We're not vibe coding it. We actually have a full team of professional full stack devs. At this time, we've hit about only a couple more people working with us. We're reducing that a little bit more as well because we're in the final stages for launch. But this took a lot of investment, and that's where I want to put my money. It's the most important thing for me, is what this project will be, what it will become, and the goal of bringing people together with real in-person events in the future, et cetera, et cetera. So anyways, it would take Bitcoin coming down to those extremes for me to like want to buy Bitcoin again. But with the prices that I've been seeing in XRP lately and this setup over here, this chart, I would buy XRP if it was around these local prices. I mean, anything in the low $1 zone is, I think that's amazing. It's an amazing buying opportunity. So I'd be DCAing over this Eclipse season, but that doesn't change. Everyone should expect that anyways. Don't wait for me though to make your moves. That's another thing that I think is important. Too many people are relying on me sharing buys and sells, and like that is not what this was all about. And it makes me even want to stop doing it. People last week heard me say something similar and have asked me, no, please continue to do it. But it's like, then nobody fucking learns, you know? And I didn't want this to be that. I've never called the Mastermind community a signals group or a trading group. And isn't it ironic that the number one way most people get scammed in crypto is by following it's by following signals. No offense, but I guess I have a bigger vision than like crypto bro life. So, but anyways, yeah, I'll continue to share buying and selling if I end up doing any, but my bigger investment is what I've always been saying people should invest most of their money in, which is in your vision, in your passion, in the thing that you want to do for humanity, or the thing you want to do for your family that you believe is something that you can be a part of every day, as opposed to waiting around for every day. And that's what's really not good about putting all of your money into solely crypto. You become tethered to the cycles. And I've seen that destroy a lot of people. A lot of people don't live their life because they think, oh, XRP is going to go to $589, so I could just throw every dollar I have into it and I'll be a gazillionaire. And that's dangerous. It's a very dangerous way to live your life. Anyways, let's move on. Bitcoin obviously oversold, backtesting key support levels that were prior resistance. I think this is important. And there's really not much more I could say about that particular setup. This is your 2-week chart, which is going to close soon. And this absorption is very, very nice to see. But keep in mind that we saw this absorption candle over here back in July. And then they hit us the month later with the Japan yen carry trade bullshit. And that brought us down again to like effectively double test these lows. So this is a thing that could be in play where we have like a massive absorption candle and then we have a following green week, but then we come down to retest it the week after. And if we were to look at the timing on all of this, 28 days later, that lands us into the lunar eclipse. So not weird to you guys. You already know about this. Let's move on to Ethereum. Are we back above 2,000 yet? Yes, we are. Okay, $2,080. All right, so we see the same shit happening on this date over here, March 31st. We have almost a nearly identical RSI read also going from top to bottom. This move over here, I've been tracking, keeping it in mind. Alt euphoria, bull trap, alt euphoria, bull trap, and in the midst of it, a 60% correction, and then coming back down to our major support trend line. Also, the full correction from alt euphoria to the bottom, almost 400 days. From alt euphoria to the bottom, just a little over 400 days. And then from this bull trap to bottom, much more rapid, almost 200 days. And then here, 200 days would put us into the month of March. So no matter how you slice it, it very much aligns with everything that we were saying a little bit earlier with regards to the upcoming lunar eclipse. And right here, this was also around a total lunar eclipse in the lunar cycle. So that's definitely in the cards. One thing that's really fascinating is we did not get a price discovery run for Ethereum. So it's almost reminding me a lot of silver, where it has this like whole cycle going from top to top and it gets rejected like it did over here, where we have the cycle in 1980, and then we have the cycle again here in 2011. But all throughout here, 2009 to 2011, gold broke out into price discovery. Silver did not. Silver double topped and then had a major correction after. Like ETH had a double top and experienced a major correction after. Bitcoin, though, went into price discovery during all of this. Just some food for thought. I'm more on the camp of I think XRP is going to mimic this move because in my opinion, the chart structure is a lot more similar. Some people are saying like the difference is this was a major cup and handle or like, come on, dude. None of that shit matters. You're looking at a 50-year chart pattern. The inverse head and shoulders, pennant, bull flag, gay flag, bear flag, whatever. That kind of stuff is irrelevant. It's the prices that we traded to that matter. Okay. The patterns are one thing. With this, I'm really just mapping out pivots. It's pivots and extremes. And that's to me what's the most important. Having this premature run, sideways chop, euphoria. Premature run, sideways chop, real euphoric top. Then it spends forever sideways. Finally, we get to backtesting the local top and we do it multiple times, no matter if it was the same or not, doesn't matter. It's just an accelerated version of the silver chart. And I think we're here where we had this disappointing cycle. Now we're correcting from it. But I do believe we'll be holding structure just like silver did in the grand scheme of things. Then we're going to have this arduous chop and recovery until it's time for liftoff. And funny enough, the price this went to was around $120. It would not shock me to see on the extended end $12 XRP, and then where it corrects to after it hits $12 would be something like $6. So I've been very vocal about my XRP price discovery idea. It's that we go pretty much straight to $7 to $8. Then we have a euphoric overextended move upwards of 15. But I think 12 is like a very safe area to consider here. And then after it does that, immediately rejected, and it could get rejected all the way coming down to like $4 again. That would be the determining decision. And I think silver is getting faced with that right now, where we've seen silver do this move. I guess we can move on and kind of combine the silver and XRP analysis together. You can see that we've come all the way to $64. That's crazy for silver. That's a 47. Yeah, okay, we talked about this last week, right? That's a 47% correction for the 47th element. That would not be weird for me for XRP, where XRP finally breaks down into price discovery. It goes straight to like $6, $7, $8, and then it hyperextends to 12, and then it gets shut down all the way back to $6, maybe $5, maybe $4, and then we build some structure in a cool-off phase, and then after that cool-off phase, we see what we can do next. And I hope, actually, you guys all know I don't hold silver. I only hold gold. And I was saying that if I did hold silver, I would sell above 107. So that call is there. It's even in like a YouTube video. That call is out there. We see what silver did after after 107. It quickly swiped up, and then it had a major flash crash, and it's still quite down from $1.07. Now, who cares about my call? It doesn't really matter to me. It's not about being right or wrong. It's about understanding the code here and how it runs the market. And the idea here about de-risking silver, but not de-risking gold, it doesn't even benefit me to talk about this because I don't have any silver. I only have gold. But I said I am not selling my gold at these levels. And the idea here is because I think silver will have like a blow-off top style correction. But I hope, and this is only for the silver investors, like I got your back, and I hope for you that what happens is we see something where it rises to like 92, 93, rejected again, maybe down to 50. And then that's your reset to head up to like 250. And that 250 could happen before the year 2029. Now, some people are getting mad at me. They're like, oh, I'm going to have to wait that long. Bro, you've already been waiting that long. Unless you got lucky and you bought at the right time. But silver's just been forever suppressed. Same with XRP. So I feel that this silver chart is giving us the cheat code. It's giving us what's about to happen. Maybe not necessarily this year. Maybe we have this move this year for XRP where we only come back up to like 3, right? And then we have to deal with like 250 to 3 again. Who cares? Coming back to that level and stabilizing is really the best thing that could happen for us. Because if we look out into the future at what's to come with this extended solar cycle, that would be, I think all these 4-year, 5-year cycle ideas are going to be broken. We're in like a new thing now. It's a totally new world. We've made it into the new era. And as we lead into the next Shemitah year, that's going to determine everything. So I can't talk about this too much longer because there's a lot more that we need to cover here. And I, of course, am like an hour and 20 minutes into today's podcast. But so far, I think gold is also tracking on this fractal. Gold has already had this major correction down to $4,404. And now we've already springboarded back up to the golden pocket. So let me show you. We've already come back up to 5,120, which is literally the bottom of the golden pocket. We can stop here, and then this can chop all the way down to around May. And that aligns very nicely with the idea of any mid-year rotation concept, because then moving back up into July would go hand in hand with Bitcoin's next eclipse season in August. So I think this is the play right now. Silver and gold are going to cool off, I believe. I don't think we should see any new all-time highs in silver and gold. If we do see new all-time highs in silver and gold in the immediate short term, that's like a really big warning for, yeah. I guess I could talk about that in the future, but that's a very big warning. That is not good. The more it keeps just pumping into price discovery and then having these major $10 trillion corrections is fucking crazy. Like, that's a sign of a complete end of the economy as we know it. Rapidly, like a rapid escalation of a deterioration of the system. And in many ways, I think some people out there who are specifically precious metals holders are like praying for that, which I find to be very weird, very awkward behavior, that you would want that, because you don't understand that, sure, you and the couple of people who hold these shiny rocks will somehow be in a quote-unquote better position, but it'll be like leave the fucking world behind. Where 99% of humanity who doesn't have your shiny rock will be trying to rob you and steal your resources and take your fucking food. So let's end that behavior here. If that is anybody inside of our mastermind community, you have to wake up. I know that's unsexy and not popular for me to say, but I would say this to the public. So I'm being a real one right now. If you're wishing that the economy collapses and that you're on the right side of it because you hold gold or whatever, you don't understand what you're wishing for. You just don't. Wisen up. I've talked about this even before about the $100 XRP calls that people are making. It's like, do you know what that does to the economy? You have to understand. We don't want a world like that. We don't want a world where there's just of even wider gap of wealth. You don't want that. It sounds good for you in the short term, but that's the kind of what they want for the world, so that all that's left is some rich people and then a bunch of humanoid robots in the workforce. That's not good. That's not a beautiful future ahead. That's kind of just more what they want. So yeah, I don't know, man. That's a side conversation, but it makes me even emotional to think about how people want that for the world. Like, people want everyone to be, yeah, whatever. Sure, being smart is really fun until you watch the world around you collapsing, and then you're just the one that's smart in a world gone to shit. And I think C19 should have taught us that that's not actually that fun. It's not that fun. It's kind of nice to not have a world where everyone is suffering because of the shit economy and it's sucking. But again, that's not an excuse to not take care of yourself and not be on the right side of it. What I'm trying to say is, don't pray for that. Don't wish that upon the world. That's kind of my point here. I'll wrap up my thoughts. Just don't wish that, because be careful what you wish for. That's not what you want. Let's move on to these altcoins. We have Hyperliquid. I don't know if I've never looked at this project. Cool. So actually, really quick, just to summarize this, I want to quickly go through Bitcoin, XRP, and Ethereum's levels to keep in mind. That might be something people are interested in. Just really quickly, we have already backtested 60. That's a very harsh drop. We have a major move over the weekend, so there'll be a massive CME gap for Bitcoin. Bitcoin already has a major CME gap between 78 to 84K. This is what I was saying. It wouldn't be weird for us to come up and fill that level around this Mercury retrograde. And then after filling that gap, perhaps we come down to fill the gap that we just created. That's an idea, okay? We'll break that down a little bit more in a midweek update. We'll have the same situation with Ethereum, but we also have the same setup with Ethereum, where there's this major gap somewhere around 2,700. If I go on the hourly, I could show you the exact level. So somewhere around 2,650. Major gap to the upside. Also, there's a couple of gaps on the way up. So just keep that in mind. Lots of CME gaps to fill. You got those levels to keep in mind. To the downside, we still have the double bottom concept with what happened on April 7th. So in that way, ETH is looking a little stronger than Bitcoin because Bitcoin has gone much lower than April 7th. ETH is holding structure. XRP has broken lower than April 7th, significantly lower, but we've had a nice buyback since. And I had this fractal overlaid on my chart, and it is so great to see us breaking it because the real price action, you see rejection, 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 all of these rejections. Then we came back to it and hyperextended below it since we've had this really sharp buyback. So we're filling this major wick from the liquidity event on October 10th. That's a good thing to get out of the way. This is not like a prediction fractal. It's just to show how there's been a similarity since the local all-time high, or the local high in July, how we've traded. And this corrective phase right here has been on the money. I'm really glad to see it breaking though. But if we are to align where the fractal reaches like another extreme, it's about where we're at, which is in a troublesome area since that was the prior support in a way. So we would hope to hold this level and at least I think fill out between $1.35 up to around $1.90. We don't really have much trading range in there. And that'd be great for XRP to really solidify that 130 support and just fill all that out. So let's move on to Hyperliquid. Again, I have not covered this project. First thing I want to do here, major fib pull from this swing high to this swing low. And let's see where we are. Okay. So there we go. Boom. Perfect to 1618. That's very normal. %65% correct. It's not so bad. This is a really good chart. I like this. When I'm looking at with the fib pull in this way, I like the correction back to the 618. It's really nice to see. The reason why is because sharp correction to the golden pocket. That was an area of a lot of chop before this major correction into April 7th. Therefore, we are higher, much, much higher than we were on April 7th. That would now be like, imagine XRP has gone lower. This project has gone higher. So if you bought on April 7th during the extremes of the year 2025 and you've held Hyperliquid through this crazy move that it's made, you're still in a pretty good position. So just consider that the release of a project, the timing of its release is quite important for some speculative investments. We've all learned that definitely with projects that did very well in the gaming sector in 2021 and how they've not recovered since. And a lot of them look really bad still to this day. So this Hyperliquid play looks pretty good. A couple of things to be said here is this falling parallel channel. Bitcoin is currently also in a falling parallel channel. Let me show you. We have extremes in the data for sure, but this is perfect where we have 126K. We have a major first correction on November 21st. You guys know all about that. Then we have the next major correction perfectly on the bottom. Now we're coming back up to the top. We have this outlier data. It's kind of interesting, but a majority of our touch points are here. Therefore, we want to see how Bitcoin reacts to like 70 to 71K when the market opens in the week ahead. Unless if for whatever reason during this weekend we just continue to fly. Very weird to see that. That's not healthy, but this is crypto. So getting back to Hyperliquid. We have a clear breakout and you can see how it reacted to that clear breakout. We've yet to really back test the breakout. Not that it needs to, but jumping straight through the golden pocket back to $38. This is some dramatic price action. So I'd love to know how much market cap this thing has. This is quite a mover. Really cool chart to see. So another thing that I would do is start marking some horizontal levels. I usually start with marking horizontal levels, but you do this long enough, you just kind of experiment on what jumps out to you first. And that's what jumped first. So I'm going to stick that there. This is a couple of key levels to consider on the upside, but then on the downside, I'm just going to keep that right there at the 702 fib. Filling out this range would be best for Hyperliquid, because the problem is if we break through this level, it's going to go straight to around 12. There's really nothing all the way to 12. As you can see, this has happened before. So that's very nice that it pivoted at this level. It had to give up 65% from the top. And this type of trading at the top is very elusive. I think this is similar to what happened with Caspa. Caspa did something like this, where like it reached a local high and then it just chop, 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 chop until it was like, this is unsustainable. And then obviously the October 10th event created a reversal for a lot of things. So we're now about 150 days out from that local top. Let me see in the other direction. It's probably pretty equidistant. Yeah, wow. So that was about 160 from that extreme to this extreme is 166 days. And from there to about, what is this? the lunar eclipse. It's pretty equidistant. So that's one thing, because timing is important here, because a lot of these things are traded by algorithmic bots. Anyways, it's all just algos that are being controlled by bots. By the exchange itself. And I'm pretty sure Hyperliquid is an exchange. So they're like, no offense, and I'm not speaking directly to them or their team. I got to be careful when I say these things, but like exchanges are the worst of the worst with the reason the crypto market is the way that it is. They're all in the pockets of the global elite. They have a huge influence now, and obviously there's always the talk of what they're doing or what their opinions are in the space. Like CZ and Binance is a great example. And then the last cycle we had the stuff that happened with FTX, again, an exchange, right? And they were paying a lot of influencers, a lot of YouTubers and finance people lots of money to talk about their platform. And then we all know how that went down. So Hyperliquid, I think, got really famous with this one guy, what's his name? James Wynn or something like this, who's probably not even a real person, by the way. Probably just some Mossad, I won't even go there. Who cares? I just find these things to be funny when people like blow up overnight and then they have these very polarizing kind of viewpoints, and it shows the power of X. Like X is an insanely powerful platform. Let's just leave it like that. So I believe maybe a lot of this success here in this project's trading has to do with these controversial people that are likely trading on their platform, likely being paid by that platform, or could be insiders on the platform themselves. No different than the shit that FTX was doing. I'm not accusing them of this, of course. I would never say such a thing for legal purposes. But yeah, I just think like that stuff, it gets a little weird. It's a little weird when people go from like being nobodies to like billion-dollar traders. And then it's all tied to promoting one particular exchange. We saw that same behavior in the last cycle, and that did not bode well. So as for this setup, I would personally not invest in this because of where it's trading at. It's high. I don't really care about it. I don't care about exchanges at all. I don't want to promote them. I would rather get into stuff that has some use case in the future of where the economy's heading. And banks are using these things right now as ways to steal retail's money through leverage trading. So chart looks fine though. Very, very good looking chart, I think, structurally. And for anyone who's holding the project, not bad. Good position to have if you got in early. All right. This project is called Ordinals. I don't think I've ever covered this project either, so that's cool. So this has some chart history going back a couple years. That's nice to see. We have a major correction into, this is crazy because this was the second or third. This was the third total solar eclipse of the solar cycle right here. And then look at what this did after that. It was like perfect buying zone. So it's just funny, like the power of eclipses on even these random altcoins. You could see a crazy pivot right here. So that's like an alt season, 3,000% into March 2024. So then what's weird here is This was the election. Whoa. That is very weird. That is very weird. There's the election. You guys know what like XRP did. So we're looking at November 5th, 2024. Let's go to this chart. XRP over here. It's November 5th, 2024. Look at what XRP did and look what this project did. Like, what? That's crazy. Like, it shows you how different this cycle was because XRP did not do this from October 23rd up to March 5th of 2024. That's a 3,000% move. Then over here you have this is the same time frame. This is October 2023. Didn't do shit, sideways. And this is kind of like the move that we recently saw with Zcash, right? Let me quickly check it out. So that's actually insane that this random project ordinals had an even crazier move, right? But this is kind of the thing about this cycle. It's been insane how these random projects do these crazy things and then they're decoupled and they don't follow the whole. Yeah, so it's clear to me that alts moving forward are very much going to be like a case by case basis, and you're going to have to be in like a particular basket of them at a particular time. And then if you want to play the game of rotating out and trying to predict the next sector that will do well, I don't think you're going to be able to do that. It's going to be more about getting out of something exciting like this and then going into something boring. So for example, if you were in ordinals and then you de-risked, then you got into boring XRP, quote unquote, and then you de-risked and then you got into boring Zcash, and then you can just keep. That seems to be the way this cycle has been, as opposed to in 2021 it was just everything went up at the same time, topped at the same time. Even if it underperformed like XRP did, it still topped what, April 2021, pretty much like everything else. So this cycle has been insanely difficult to navigate in that way because there's been no alt season. It's just been isolated projects have done really well at certain times, and this is clearly one of them. Considering, look at where it's at now, 96%. So this was euphoria for a lot of altcoins, and we're now past 400 plus days of that. It's just been perpetually down. This is crazy. It's crazy to look at. And the thing that's hard to predict as well is, will this do another move like that again? What would make that happen? Well, we have Bitcoin dominance has to correct quite heavily. And I do assume this calendar year in 2026, we could have one of those moments where it only takes a small little correction in Bitcoin dominance to see a move like that. Like, let's look at October 2023 to January 2024 on Bitcoin dominance. There's, was it right here? That was it. That was it. That was it. And a lot of things went crazy during that time. A lot of things. Even this move over here. This was a crazy move for altcoins. Look at what look at what XRP did during this time. Stellar Lumens, HBAR, Dogecoin. This was only an 11% correction for Bitcoin dominance. Now Bitcoin dominance is like getting to a point where it's about to fall off again. And if we can get down to that 54%, I mean, be absolutely glorious, I think, for altcoins in the short term. So let's wrap up this ordinals TA by actually doing some TA. Nothing fancy though. I'm going to stop that there. I'm going to pull the fib here. Yeah, and that 236 is getting tagged right away. And the reason why I'm doing this is because of this pivot right there. So to me, this looks like a spring or a selling climax. And the way that the selling climaxes go is they can come all the way back up to the 0.5 fib, even the golden pocket. which is, it seems crazy, but it's the way a project can move. For example, you see how where we are here and how it went straight up to that 702 level? Why couldn't it do it again? I know it's crazy, but that's how some of these things can go. So that's about a 900% move in the midst of the whole quote unquote bear market that it'll still trade in. Meaning, where we're at right now is probably insanely oversold, and it's worth a venture capital position if you want to speculate. If you have some shekels laying around and you want to put them into this project, not financial advice, but when you see a market this oversold and you have Bitcoin this oversold, it's kind of the environment where we start to see, crazy moves in the middle of the overall cycle. So this looks like an opportunity, but it doesn't have enough chart history for me to personally feel comfortable. And then it's already made a 3,000+% move. So it's kind of like falling for the same thing that we might have done in the past with the 2021 cycle, where you just look back at the 2021 cycle and you saw a crazy move. So you make that assumption that, oh, it could do it again. You need to have people willing to get into this project too. So when it's fresh, there's a lot of reasons to pile in. And then it could still be fresh and there's a lot of reasons to get out. Look at what happened with the Trump coin, people just riding the wave of the meme. So that's something I'm keeping in mind for this particular project here. Even though it's very oversold, that doesn't mean that it's going to go back up for sure. But the levels of significance here that I marked, somewhere around 8 to 15 is important. So keep that $14 level in mind. And for the fact that it's almost $3, that's still a nice move. About 300%. In the middle of a bear market, if you can make 300% on a play, you would not be angry. Just be careful, because remember, we're approaching eclipse season. So that total lunar eclipse can continue to fill out this wick here. And then you're playing with fire at a time where, sure, something's really, really oversold. It's not wrong to be in, but I want you guys to be cautious on this. Now we're looking at Curve DAO token. A lot of people have told me to look into investing in this. Okay, it's taken a leg lower since, I suppose, the last time I've looked at it. We're trading in like no man's land. Coming all the way back down to the lows of August 2024. Is this kind of similar to Aerodrome? I feel like there's a similar chart that I'm seeing here, but there's your key level around $1. It's currently around like 25 cents. This thing could easily pop back up to $1.11, somewhere around this $1.11 range, which was the last time we were there in August 2025. It was a major rejection in January 2023, major rejection over here in Q4 2024. So it really likes this level, and it feels like anything above that level is not in the cards, but enough time smacking against the level and you're bound to break through it. So just take that into consideration with where we're at right now and the fact that we've had two major retests of the lows. This is probably primed for calling somewhere around 40 to 50, let's call it 50 cents, is a fair price. Anytime we're dropping below 40 cents, it's getting bought back up. And anytime that we get to $1, it gets smacked down. So somewhere around 50 cents seems to be a fair price for this project. And that's been where it's been trading at most of its time. So from here to a normal macro automatic rally breakout would be around a 700% move. And obviously you have the lower end of this around 500%. It can hit these levels, but just consider that the last time it did was back in 2021, 2022. So that was in the last cycle. It will take Bitcoin dominance having a hefty rollover for this to occur. And it's not a hype project, clearly, because there's nothing like what we saw in the Hyperliquid chart or that crazy breakout in ordinals in October of 2023. Like, look at what this did in October. Sorry, this was October 2023. Right here. It went up about 100%. in that play, that pivot from October 2023. And then it went even lower. So this thing's doing its own thing. Also, similar to what we've been seeing in all of these charts lately, completely separate looking chart structures that have nothing similar. But if you were looking at things back in 2021, 2022, they all look the same. So keep this $1 level in mind. If we could break that on ordinals, meaning if you're anybody who's been invested in this thing, anything above $1, it's probably going to start breaking out, going straight to 2, perhaps even 3. 3 would be a big de-risk area. I don't know if that's possible unless we have a major move up across the board in all altcoins. All right, now we're going to wrap this up with ICP. Oh man, I don't think we could cover this project anymore because I feel like the same reaction every time I cover it. It's just the same. What's going on here, man? Yeah, I've never invested in this thing. I've actually spoke quite negatively about it, which I don't do too often. I don't feel like where I every time I see the same chart, I'm like wondering like what is going on? Is this gonna get? Just because it has like I think quite a community behind it, and I'm curious as to why. This is not looking good. This is looking equally as bad as anything that has not even a fraction of the community or people talking about the quote unquote technology behind it or use case or whatever. So I know it was a thing that was pretty much involved in insider trading back in 2020 into 2021. That's what I could say. So just the original story behind how it was all launched onto public crypto exchanges and how it was a rug pull, essentially. And we could look back at the data and prove that. It was at $600 at the time. And then some of you might remember, it was ranked number 3 in market cap for like the first week it was publicly available on exchanges. It's down 99% from there. And then a bunch of insiders were in it before it got put on the public exchanges. So just like really skeevy, weird, I don't know. Not my thing. But whatever. Don't date it, don't hate it, don't trade it either. We got to wrap this one up. It's late. We have clear weakness, low, lower low, lower low, October 10th event, and even lower. Double bottom on this October 10th event. Sure, it's getting a little bit of a buyback recently, but like nothing really notable. There's nobody in this project anymore. You can just tell by the way the chart looks. So what's holding it together might literally only be a community, which is very similar to what's going on with Hex. No offense to those that are people that are in Hex or the Hex community, but it's kind of that, you know, where like every time I check back in on that chart, I'm like, ooh, it gets worse. But then there's this massive community behind it that holds it together, you know? If they would just all start leaving in droves, then this thing would look horrendous, you know? But that confidence is on a razor thin edge with this kind of stuff. And I bring it up because when you see things like this, you really need to be careful with hard-earned money. If you're just in venture capital stuff and you have a couple $100 to throw around and you've learned a lot about this project and you feel like it's worth investing, then sure, give it a shot. But like, I would caution away from this. And even a lot of investments that I made a couple of years ago, like things like Filecoin and what else, Sand, you know, these are not like where I would put all of my money into. Would I be putting as much money that I put in as XRP or HBAR or XLM? Definitely not. Okay. You need to do your research and ensure that you're about to put hard-earned money in stuff that you're willing to lose, or just watch it be painfully boring for years and years to come. And there's no updates because there is no updates coming. Like this is it. We're moving into a brand new economy. You need to look at stuff that will be part of that, or that the New World Order has completely sunken their teeth into, which is something like a Bitcoin, right? So I've even seen like maybe, I don't even know, probably 5 different billionaires in the past week that have started talking about selling their assets to buy more Bitcoin right now. It's crazy. Like I did not hear that type of stuff over the last 2 to 3 years when Bitcoin was 100K. But now that it's giving us back these prices again, smart, quote unquote, smart money is thinking about ways to acquire more Bitcoin. And that's wild. So You're not hearing that too much probably unless you're in the know. And then there's on-chain stuff going on where a lot of those old Bitcoin wallets, the like Satoshi era wallets, are already done with most of their selling going back to like November, December of last year. And what's happened recently has just been purely leverage. And there's a lot of paper crypto. There's a lot of crypto that's just hanging on with leverage. So I think there's very little leverage going on in this ICP chart. There's just no one here. People are slowly getting rid of it as they can, and maybe they're just remembering they have some. They're getting rid of it that way. So I think keep that in mind. But anyways, XRP having a nice move. We'll see how this week ahead goes. We have some big updates. I think X.com is going to start allowing for trading of crypto. That's big. I don't know exactly how that's going to go. I haven't had the time to research into it. As I said, I'll be losing my power all of tomorrow, so hopefully this longer and earlier arriving podcast is appreciated by everyone. I wanted to make sure that I had a nice, thorough one this week because it's the start of Eclipse season. And as I said, I'll have this Year of the Horse decoded coming out very, very soon, probably in the next 3 or 4 days. So stay tuned for that. And in the meantime, appreciate and I'm grateful for every single one of you. Wishing you all an amazing week ahead in the Matrix. Much love.